Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, episode number 47. Grab them by the throat and never let go of them. Billy Wilder.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And today's show is also sponsored by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators. If you want access to filmmaking documentaries, feature films about filmmaking, interviews with some of the top screenwriters and filmmakers in Hollywood, as well as educational online courses all in one place, IFH TV is for you. And what if I told you you could get all of this for free? Just head over to indiefilmhustle.tv for your free 7-day trial. Now, before we get started on this crossover episode, you might have noticed that the name sounded a little bit different in the opening of the show. I decided to change the name of the show to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast as opposed to the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, because I felt it was just a little bit better for people to find the show and people looking for screenwriting. It just makes a little bit more sense. So from now on, the show will be called the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast. So just keep notes of it. It is the same podcast. It's still the same everything. I just changed the name. All the graphics have changed. But if you still want to get to the show, of course, just go to screenwritingpodcast.com, and that takes you straight to the iTunes link. Now, today we do have a crossover episode between the Indie Film Hustle podcast and the Bulletproof Screenwriting podcast, because, every once in a while I get these amazing guests that their information crosses over between both filmmaking and screenwriting and really gets deep into it. And today's episode is no exception. Today on the show, we have a unique human being by the name of Stephen Follows. Stephen is by far one of the best analytical film data guys ever. He is kind of like Rain Man, but with film data. And he is probably the best film research guy I've ever even seen or heard of. A lot of big studios go to him for this information because he just is one of those guys who can break through it all. And the information that he's doing through his website and through his reports is mind-boggling. In today's episode, we're going to talk about what makes a good screenplay. So this man went through 12,000 screenplays and all of their coverage that were covered by professional script coverage people, and then analyzed all the data from all of these script readers and put a report together on what makes a good screenplay, what readers, what Hollywood, what passes, what doesn't pass, what gets produced, what doesn't get produced. This by far is one of the most just mind-boggling things I've ever heard of, and he is the man to do it. So without any further ado, please enjoy my insane conversation with Stephen Follows. I'd like to welcome to the show Stephen Follows, man. Thank you so much from your busy, insane schedule, sir, to come on the show and share your knowledge bombs with the tribe today.
Hey, my pleasure. I'm really delighted to be here, and it's really nice to connect up and hopefully, help your audience as much as the work you're doing already helps them. Absolutely,
man. I mean, before we get started, I have to tell everybody in the tribe that I am a huge fan of what you do. Stephen is easily the best film researcher, film data guy on the planet. Without question, the stuff that he does is absolutely insane. And we're going to talk about one of those insane projects in this episode without question. But we were just talking about...
It helps that there aren't many of us, right?
Yeah, so you don't have a lot of competition.
I'm maybe doing well, but in a small category, yeah.
But the point is the work that you do, which is, obscene amounts of data crunching for the film industry, and then you put that kind of information out. You don't hide it behind, $1,000 paywall. You give it away, or give it, or pay as you go, or whatever it is. You really are trying to help the community. So I am excited to talk about your latest project, and we're also going to talk about some of your past projects as well. But before we get into it, why? Like, at what point did you have like data, like charts on your wall when you were a child? How did you become the world, like the film data guy, and what made you want to get into this side of the business? And I know you have other, you are in other parts of your business, but first of all, how did you get into the business? And then we'll talk about your film data stuff.
Well, I've always been into film as a kid. That's been always my thing. That's always the medium and the power of it. And, everything from your, the tentpole, popcorn blockbusters, I love them. And right down to right across to kind of really heartfelt indie films that make you think and cry. And, it's always been my thing. So film has always been there as a constant. And then I used to write a little bit as a kid, but mostly I wanted to be a producer. And I went to film school and I was in a class of like 100 people and everyone wanted to be a director or a camera person. And I wanted to produce. So I just produced loads and loads of terrible short films. And just, producing was my thing. I can organize stuff and I like to bring things to reality. And I also like working with other people. So I never want to go away and just do something by myself. I kind of like the idea of a team and what that makes. And then set up a production company and working away at that, writing and producing stuff. And my business partner, Ed, is a director and a really good one at that. And so we sort of built a company that was a video company and now focuses on storytelling. So we still make videos, we do TV commercials, all our stuff is for charities in the third sector. And so that part of my life is that sort of 15-year journey, which was always driven about wanting to get films made and wanting to move people, and then with the charity thing, wanting to do it for the good guys and get people to change their behavior. And then on the side of all of that is that before I went to college, I had to decide, did I want to study film and then do the kind of academic intellectual stuff that I enjoyed on the side, or the other way around? Did I want to go and study, I don't know, politics or economics and then do film on the side? Mm-hmm. And I decided that it was more interesting to study film and to keep the intellectual stuff as a hobby and not try and do it as something useful. Mm-hmm. And, it's just curiosity, there's more than anything else. It's just about wanting to understand how the world works. And so then I did that, and I sort of made a commitment to myself, I will make sure that I do some stuff that uses my brain. My running a production company definitely uses many parts of who I am, but the creativity and the people skills and things like that, none of it's using just the logical part. There's so many more things going on. And so I sort of used to do little projects and stuff. And I quite often, if I had a debate with a friend in the pub about film, they'll be like, oh yeah, there are more comedies. And I'd say, I don't know, I don't think so, or whatever. And I was the one that would go home and try and find out, not to win the argument, but because it's frustrating to have people in the film industry just chatting to each other without the information. And if they knew, they could do that far better for their audience, for themselves, for their projects. And the industry is not very good at sharing that information. So It was always a hobby. And I just started putting it out on the blog because I felt that it was a good place to do it. And why not share it? There's two cool things about this. One is discovering something and going, oh my God, look how cool that is. The second half is just as interesting, which is, hey guys, come look at this, because then people go off and use it in a way you never thought. And then they come back and they're like, oh, that thing you showed me, I used it like this. And you're like, oh, that's really cool. So sharing the information has been as essential as doing it for me all along. So then I started doing the blog, and then somebody told me that it was good to try and have some structure to it. So I decided to publish every Monday. I just, one of those things where when you have loads of different things in your life that are all different shapes, it's very hard to work out what to do today. And so by having these self-imposed deadlines, it really helped. And I just kept looking for stuff. And the more I look for something, the more I find something else to think of, and things build on other things. And sometimes someone will tell me about a cool technique, like I was it a couple of years ago, someone told me about this API where you could send it a picture of a human face and it would tell you all the emotions in it. And I'm like, oh, cool. I wonder if it worked for movie posters. And I sent a few movie posters and it worked. And then I'm like, wow, I could send all movie posters. And so you
see, now you see, that's where this is where you are different than most human beings. One or two, that's kind of cute, but then you go straight to all movie posters.
Why not? What are the steps I'm missing in the middle? Because the thing is, the hard things are, conceiving of it and then building it. But then it's like building a whole printers and then printing one magazine, like one copy. No. Do a print run for everyone. And then once you have all this data, what's really fun is that you tend to get really clear patterns and stories, and you say, oh yeah, I always knew that, or I knew that as a film fan, but now I've got the proof. Or actually, everything the industry says about X is just wrong. It just doesn't work like that. And the people at the very top, or the people who've been in it for a very long time, they know this, but they let everyone else think the other thing because it makes it easier for them or whatever. And so it's really nice to come back and go, hey, no, guys, this is something that you can do to help the work you're doing, And I think this is awesome. Like, that's really a fun thing to do because people are going off and using it. Like, if someone's going to make a movie and they're going to make it like this, but I know that choice they've made is not going to be great for their success. If I can nip in and help them and give them a little bit of advice, they're still doing all the hard work, but then their film will be, much more successful or whatever it will be. I feel like if you can do that, you kind of got to. You don't. It's not really a choice. It's kind of, I've got a small part I can play along the journey, and if I don't, then I'm being a bit lazy and not really playing my part to the community.
That's yeah. It again, like we've said off air, it's like that's just so not in my wheelhouse. I'm so impressed with that mentality and how your mind works. And then you were telling me like I'm marketing. I'm like, well, that's me. I could do that. that's in my wheelhouse, without question. But your work is doing an insane amount of good for a lot of filmmakers and a lot of people in the business. And your latest project, which I'm going to read the cover, which when I was approached by about this, my mouth dropped. I could not believe that someone did this. But then I saw your name on it, and I was like, well, of course. And then it makes perfect sense. Only a psychopath would do this. I'm like, oh, it's Stephen Follows. Okay, it makes perfect sense. The new report is called Judging Screenplays by Their Coverage. You analyzed 12,000 plus unproduced feature film screenplays and the scores they received, and reveals what professional script readers think make a good screenplay. And that's what this entire report is about. And it gives you a real, this is an interesting report because it's about 12,000 unproduced feature films, not produced feature films. So please tell me how this came to be and how did you go about putting this together? And then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty of the report.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, this is not the main reason I do it, but there is a real side pleasure in doing something that it's like a magician where they spend years training how to do this thing, and then they got all this equipment and a team, and then they're able to go, oh yeah, like this, and it's like, oh, it's magic. And as any screenwriter will tell you, nothing is magic. It's just hard work. Like you watch Ocean's 11 and like, oh, how did they get out of that situation? You're like, well, the screenwriter or writers worked on it for like a year and then made it look easy. So yeah. So what happened here was I was talking over a year ago with the guys at Screencraft, and they manage all sorts of competitions and things like that. And they are really good guys that are really interested in helping screenwriters. It's one of those businesses that's a proper business that's come out of wanting to support screenwriters. Mm-hmm. And I can tell, in the sense that I talk to lots of people and lots of people suggest things, and you can tell which people are just saying, hey, can we just get some value out of this or whatever? And then there are other people who really want to sort of say, yeah, but how does this help writers? And so we were chatting, and both of us had seen years ago, there was an infographic that was still doing the rounds. Like, it's a big one-page infographic, and it was from one particular script reader who had kept loads of notes of all the scripts they've ever read. Mm-hmm. And there was interesting things like what country or what state the characters were from or whatever. But then on the right-hand side was this list that was about why they thought the scripts were bad or why they were held back. Didn't have a strong protagonist, didn't have a strong plot, and they'd ranked them based on how many times that came up. And John at Screencraft and I were both independently saying to each other, oh, there's that thing I saw years ago that was really cool. And I was like, can we do that at scale? can we, and we can't find the exact things like that, like protagonist is a bit weak in the third act, because that is nuance that the data would struggle to really understand. But there is loads of stuff we can do. And so we spent some time talking about, okay, but how do we do this, like in this modern world of privacy? How do we do this without it being a problem? We don't want to be taking people's private work and doing all sorts of things with it. And so that held us back a little bit to figure out how we do this without causing any problems. We don't want to be the next like Facebook or whatever. But at the same time, I think we can help screenwriters. And so in the end, we worked out a kind of complicated but good system that anonymized all the data, all the scores that their readers got, but still allowed us to have a look en masse. So it wasn't a case of us sitting there reading every script and all that kind of stuff. It was more turning it into data. And as I said, the scores, what they get from readers, was not just the overall score, but also all sorts of things like catharsis, plot, structure, voice, things like that. Taking all of those, anonymizing them, but still being able to sort of link data points. And then, okay, great. So we got over that hurdle. And then it took longer than I thought it was going to on the data side from my point of view.
Shocking.
There's just so much information.
Shocking.
Yeah. Well, it's just, and also it's one of those things where you start and you think, okay, I'll just do ABC. And then you're like doing that. You're like, oh, look, D exists. Oh, yeah, E exists. F, G. And then, so it really was a discovery thing where as soon as we cracked one thing, we discovered two more things. And in the end, we had to go, okay, there's some things we put to one side and said, you know what, I'm not going to do anything on this because we can do this in the future and it's just too much now. And I should say, I keep saying we. So I led the process, and it was certainly something that John at Screencraft and I set up. But also there was two great people that really helped me, Josh Cockcroft and Leora Michelin. Both of them really helped me with the coding and the thought process and the writing it up, and it was a team effort. So yeah, there's a few things we left on the table, but then we ended up with this 50-page report that looks at three different things. Fundamentally, the main thing is that it looks at what professional script readers think a good script looks like. And we can talk more about what that is in a bit. So that's the main purpose of the report. But then the next bit was about, well, what does the average screenplay look like? Like what's normal? Not even good or bad, but like how many characters, scenes, pages, dialogue, locations. And then finally, there's little bits we could do about screenwriters. Again, we don't know like individually who they are or how old they are and like that. But there are some things we can figure out with gender and genre and which bits of software they use as well, because which program do you write with and stuff like that. So that's the bits that we decided to lend in. So you may be telling me you think it's long. I think it's short.
Of course you do. You're psychotic. You're psychotic, Stephen. That's fine.
So kind. Thank you.
But you're psychotic in a wonderful way, sir. In a wonderful, wonderful way. As you're talking, I just realized who you are. You're moneyballing screenwriting.
Yeah, it's so funny because that's come up a few times, and we thought about like, okay, do we lean into that or lean out of that? And ultimately, I think the really important thing to remember with this is that we are judging what script readers think a good script is. We're not saying what audiences do. We're not saying what will work, what won't, and we're also not. There's no formula for. The more data I get into, the more I appreciate the value and importance of human creativity and ingenuity and hard work.
Absolutely.
So it's not like, I can just generate a script now. So you're absolutely right, but of a very narrow thing. This is the gatekeepers. As you know, the people who get you in the room. That get you, place you in a competition or whatever, or give you validation to show what you can do. That's what we're focusing on, this really narrow gatekeeper role. Right, exactly. So, the difference between Moneyball is they were literally just looking at stats. So there was a different thing there. There was no creativity involved. But this is a moneyballing of script readers and what betters your chance of getting a screenplay through the gatekeeper, which is a massive head start above everybody else. If you know this information, you've just changed your odds of writing something or creating something with your creativity and with your skill and your craft to actually be able to break through the door much faster and get more attention quicker, just based on this research. And as I'm skimming through the report, I just came across like what matters most to script readers. And on the most important side, it is
characterization, plot, style, the voice of the writer, and then the things that matter the least. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Theme, hook, originality, format. And which is opposite of what a lot of people talk about. A lot of people talk about, oh, it has to be completely original. Oh, it has to be perfect format. You've got to have a good hook, and the theme's got to be really great. Structure's down there as well, but they really care about characters. They care about plot, and they care about style and the voice. So it's more of less of the technical and more of the creative is what they're looking for, at least from just looking at it a very quick glance.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the important things to sum this up with is that if you get the technical stuff wrong, you can fail, but you can't win without the other stuff. So it's almost like the reason that you do the technical stuff is so that you don't get, so that you don't get thrown out.
It's the foundation.
Exactly. It's the foundation. Exactly. That's a great way of putting it. But if you're going to excel, if you're really going to make something incredible, then your voice as a writer is the most important thing that people are after. And it's fascinating to see this in the data, because I see this in other places as well. When you look at what movies are successful and things like that, you can't say that this is always the case in every place, but being good or working hard come out very, very often as amongst the number one things. And here as a writer, it's not about tricking them with a clever line or like a good title or like it's formatted, beautifully. Or that it's so different just for the sake of being different. What we can see here is what it matters is, can you write something? Do you have a voice? Do you have an authenticity? The idea of writing a really good spec script in Hollywood to get yourself noticed, but they're not going to pick up your script. They're not going to make it. But the fact that you could write it with a certain voice is what will open doors. And you see the same thing here. And because these are all spec scripts, you can see actually, this is what you should be doing. Don't worry too much about how viable it actually is to be made tomorrow. Don't spend forever just focusing on the formatting. That's not to say it's not something, but fundamentally, who are you? What have you got to say? How would you describe these events? Not what are these events? And that's what these people want. And I love that, because I think and I hope that's what writers want to do. They want to see the world, think about it, and express it. And I find that really pleasing and reassuring that that's what the script readers are after too.
If you take a list of the top 20 screenwriters who have worked in Hollywood, dead or alive, but let's say alive, I'm going to say that all of them have a very unique voice. The Sorkins, the Shane Blacks, the Kaufmans, these kind of Christopher Nolan, these guys have very specific styles and have a very unique voice. Sure, there's always going to be technicians, always going to be craftsmen who could just get in there, knock out a script, be kind of, straight down the middle. But the ones that stand out, the ones that really that we know the name of the writers off the top, like I say, Sorkin, everybody should know who Sorkin is. Everyone should know who Kaufman is, or Black. These are screenwriters whose style is so significant. Tarantino, so significant that their last name is enough to create that. And I think people forget about the voice because they're always so caught up with trying to do something that's going to impress, or what's hot now, or all this kind of stuff. And this obviously proves the one thing that I find interesting, because we're going to talk about genre next, is that a lot of things are, what's hot and what's not hot. There's certain things that just stay hot and certain things that just don't stay hot for a long time. And they stay consistent over time. Yeah, sure, they'll have little peaks and valleys of horror is really hot right now, or this is really hot right now. But do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. And I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right. What's interesting is that because we are film fans, we're cinephiles, we go and see movies, and then we are film professionals, we sometimes overthink the film professional side of things and ignore the film fan side of these things, And so sometimes you go through this big data process, you write it all up, and then you're like, oh yeah, I kind of knew that. But that's okay, because you've got validation and proof. But I'll give you an example. You were talking about genre. all of those things that we talked about, we correlated the success of the overall script based on their scores for all these things, which exactly as you said, says basically the shorthand of this is how important are each of these things. And like you said, formatting comes out as the least important across all genres. It is not irrelevant, but it's just not the most important thing. But what is the most important thing changes depending on different genres. So the ones you talked about, like characterization and voice, then they're number one for most of the genres. Mm-hmm. But then if you think about a family film, right? So the most important thing for a family film is catharsis.
Yes.
Which makes perfect sense as a film fan. You know, I'm not sure I would have sitting there and guessed it if I was, before we did this work, I would have written it like this. But now I see it, I'm like, of course, because you need a family film to be safe. You need it to be something you can put the kids in front of that you can watch. And you need the journey to end, and it needs to end satisfactorily, you know? I'll give you an example. So there's a viral video from like, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And what it is Toy Story 3 had just come out on DVD and Blu-ray. And for a Christmas prank, a family had taken it, two kids had taken it and cut out the very ending. So that what happens is they're all going into the incinerator. They're all about to die. They say their goodbyes, and then the credits roll, right? And they showed it to their mom, right? And they had a hidden camera, and she's watching it like a big fan of Toy Story. Scene 1, scene 2. She watches 3. She thinks they're all going to their death, and then the credits roll, and then she's like, "What? What?" And she looks like she's devastated, like not just sad, but like her world has fallen apart. And like it goes on, it's very funny. And then they own up and they tell her what they did. But what's so funny about that is it's saying the same thing as this data, which is you don't expect a family film to leave you hanging. It has to close up. Yeah. But you think about a thriller or a good drama, like a really good drama, maybe the characters have a resolution, maybe they don't, but the themes never are resolved really, because these are questions about what it is to be a human being. And so it makes sense that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily use this data to go and craft the perfect plot for a family film. But if you've written the first few drafts and you're like, okay, how can I improve this? You go, okay, well, is my catharsis, you know, how cathartic is this? How much does it actually close at the end of the journey? And whereas if you're doing some other genres, it becomes far less important. Adventure films, it becomes less important in that sense.
Right, like if you look
I'm sorry. That's so interesting.
No, like you look
at it. Yeah,
if you listen to or you watch Free Willy, like if Willy doesn't get free at the end of that movie, they don't have 4 other movies.
No. Exactly. You need closure, you know, and catharsis and closure are slightly different things, but they're in the same wheelhouse, and it makes such sense
for a family film. But you don't need that for a horror movie. I mean, the killer could get away, and then that's sequels. It's just different by genre. But based on the report, the advice per genre, which I find a little fascinating, but once you start thinking about it, it makes perfect sense. The genres that are scored the highest. I'm just going to do the top 3 and the top bottom 3. The top is thriller. Then goes animated, it goes adventure, which makes perfect sense because those films kind of cross over tastes, meaning that almost everybody can enjoy a good thriller. Almost anybody can enjoy a good adventure film. Almost anybody can enjoy a good animated film because you know what you're expecting with that. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got comedy is the worst reviewed, fantasy, and sci-fi. So then if you start thinking about it, I'm like, well, comedy, not everyone's going to get certain jokes. And then if you don't like fantasy, it's probably it's a riskier genre. Same thing for sci-fi. If you're not a sci-fi or fantasy fan, not everyone's going to enjoy it. Everyone's going to generally enjoy a really good thriller or a really good adventure film, like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Almost anybody could enjoy Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, you don't have to be a fan of archaeology.
Yeah.
But you have to be a fan of Lord of the Rings to enjoy Lord of the Rings.
I couldn't. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there are other things as well when you think about it. Like comedy is the only genre where you can really fail at. Like, you know, if you've got a horror film and it's not very scary, it's still a horror film. It's just a bad one. Or everything is drama. Like us talking is drama. It's not very dramatic, but it's drama. But if we don't make jokes, it's not a comedy. And so the answer can be no. And then for fantasy and sci-fi, my theory on this one, which is just my theory of the same data that you've got in front of you, but my theory is that if you get some of the details wrong in a fantasy or a sci-fi when you're writing the script, it's confusing. And humans don't mind mystery. Mystery is intriguing, but confusion feels horrible.
Yes.
When something's confusing, it's genuinely painful in an emotional sense. Whereas a thriller, if it's confusing, it doesn't matter as much because it's about the unknown. Fantasy, like, you want to know the world, you know? I saw Fantastic Beasts 2 not long ago. I won't spoil anything about the
I haven't
film.
seen that one yet. Oh, yeah.
J.K. Rowling's already spoiled it. It's fine.
I've never heard of her. Is she good?
I think she's amazing, but in this film it's a bit confusing. But my main point with this is that every now and then there's a situation that the characters are in, and then it turns out there's a magic way of getting them out, like literally magic, and that's fine. But it's a bit of a frustrating as an audience because you feel disempowered to be able to figure out what's going on because she can't explain the volume of stuff that she knows about that world. And so when you get a fantasy or a sci-fi wrong, you're not explaining enough for the audience. And so the ones that are bad tend to be quite bad. You know, a not very good sci-fi, not very good fantasy, and not very good comedy actually feel pretty shitty. Whereas a not very good thriller, still a thriller. So my guess is that this is about whether you can fail at a genre or leave people completely confused, or whether you actually can just make them think it's average and fine. But you know, who knows? We know one of the things we can't tell here is that there is no, and we certainly don't have access to any objective measure of quality. So it could well be that over these 12,000 scripts that maybe the comedies were bad, you know, and maybe the script readers were biased. I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. There's enough of them.
Comedy is extremely difficult. It's probably one of the most difficult things to write, to direct, to make a movie of, because I still remember Airplane. When the worst test screening ever in Paramount's history, the worst test screening ever. And the reason why they went back and analyzed why, because it was obviously a classic and one of the biggest hits Paramount ever had at the time. And I can still watch it now and piss myself because it's one of the best comedies ever. But don't get me started, because all the lines are starting to come back in my head. So I don't want to go down the Airplane road. But they figured that people at that time in history did not feel comfortable enough to admit that they liked it. So when they wrote it down on the cards, they just wrote down bad reviews because they didn't want to say, I really like this lowbrow slapstick stuff. And that was fascinating to me.
You know, that's the same. It's the same with horror, though. Like, horror has always been a genre where in the 80s and 90s, people denied it. They're like, I think Fangoria, like a magazine in the UK aimed at like fantasy and horror, they used to have a column that was entitled something like "It's not a horror, but," or like that, and it was people promoting movies that were like, it's not a horror, it's like a dark psychological thriller, and people would basically use all of these words to say it's not a horror. And then that generation that grew up on those horror films actually grew up into positions of power and went, no, I like horror, and horror kind of exploded, and then people became less ashamed of liking horror. But horror has the least connection when it comes to horror movies, the least connection between what critics and audiences say they think about it and whether they make money or not. You know, if you want to make a lot of money with a drama and documentary, they need to be good by both audience and critic standards. With horror, it's irrelevant. You know, The Purge has made so much money. Officially, no one likes it. You know, it's got terrible audience reviews, terrible critics reviews, and it does just fine. And there are other horror films that are like, oh, this is a work of art, and they just don't make very much money. And it's not that they have to be bad, it's that they're disconnected. So you're right. There's this, everything we're looking at is a lens through a lens through a lens. And if the lens is tell me what you think, well, then suddenly I'm thinking, well, who are you? How do I want to be seen? You know, whereas when you've got things like, these are anonymous script reports, in the sense that no one's going to know who wrote them. You can actually say what you think. You're not having to stand up there and defend it. You know, or if you're a critic, you're thinking, what do people think of me? What do they think? My photo's next to this. You know, like, of course I don't like this schlocky horror. Of course I like the really important foreign film or whatever. But when you look at what people pay to see, or what they rent or whatever, you see a different story.
Yeah, when Silence of the Lambs won the Oscar, or was nominated during that time, it is still the first and only horror movie to ever win the Oscar, to my knowledge, at least.
Because they told everyone it wasn't a horror film.
It was a thriller.
That's how you got away with it.
It was a psychological thriller. You never once heard anyone call it a horror film, ever. Mm-hmm. But when you watch it, it's an effing horror film.
Call it what you want.
Terrifying.
When you play.
Yeah, it is terrifying. And by the way, do you know that Hannibal Lecter's on screen for like 12 minutes?
Really?
in the entire movie, like 12 to 15 minutes. But all you can remember is him in that movie.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Now, and this is another bit of data that everyone always asks about. What is the key amount of pages? What's the number? What is the sweet spot for page count? Because I mean, we've all seen the 200-page script written by a first timer saying this is so good that Hollywood's going to take notice. And professionals were going to go look at him and go, look, dude, it's just not going to work out for you. You need to stop.
Well, it's like that joke of a producer picking up a long script and going, oh, I don't like it. It feels expensive.
Exactly. It does. It doesn't make financial sense. Even George Lucas had to break up Star Wars into 3 movies because his first script was like 250 pages or something like that. But so I'm looking at the numbers right now of what, and it's kind of where I was. A couple of surprises though. I didn't, because normally I always thought it was like 90 to 95 was a sweet spot, but it seems to be 95 to 99 is a good sweet spot. But then it jumps right to 105 to 109 and 110 to 114.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about the on any chart there's going to be a little bumpiness. And, and so 95 to 99 seems to be ever, marginally higher than 100 to 104. But I wouldn't worry about those kind of details because that's not, significant in a data sense. But what is significant is on either end, under about 85 pages.
Oh, yeah, done.
Over about 130, and it falls off a cliff. And there is a pleasing bell curve around here, and like you said, 95 to 115 is about the highest. But ultimately, the biggest piece of news from this is as long as it's not too long or too short, it doesn't matter.
You're right. They're very close. They're very close.
They're very close. And it's certainly not enough like that you should go and add in a couple of pages and it will make a big difference to your score because it depends what's on those pages, right?
Exactly.
And I think as short as you can be to get your whole thing across, but also once you start crossing below 90 pages, it's less and less like a feature film,
Right.
And you've less in the edit and stuff. And we found that in a few different things where I had exactly the same as you. When I started this, I was like, right, I got some stuff I want to test, talking about how I started doing all of this data stuff in the first place. I'm thinking, right, I want to test whether there is a sweet spot for pages. And I also want to test if voiceover is a good or bad thing. Because my theory has always been, well, the theory I was educated on really, was that voiceover is a bad thing when it comes to writing.
That was my next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's for novels, right? It's a literary format. It's a way where you say what the character is thinking internally, but that's not how movies work. Movies are show, don't tell. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, great, we'll be able to test that. We'll be able to see if voiceover does harm movies because the argument against voiceover is that's a literary thing. It's internal monologue. You should show this stuff. If you have to say the character thinks, a voiceover, I was feeling sad at this point, then you're not doing a good job writing it. The counter argument is usually just Goodfellas, where
I'll throw one even better. Shawshank.
That's a great example.
It's like the best movie. It's still in my top 2 movies ever. I mean, it's like one of the greatest, and it's wall to wall voiceover. And Goodfellas is too, and Goodfellas is also an amazing film. But Shawshank really, because it's considered arguably one of the best movies ever made. At least by IMDb, at least by IMDb ratings.
Yeah. And by the way, for every group, old, young, male, female, like this isn't a movie that's being swamped like The Matrix is being swamped by younger male people. No. The Shawshank is universal. And let's remember, it's a 3-hour brutal racist prison drama. It's not like it didn't have money written on it.
And it's called the worst title ever, The Shawshank Redemption. I
don't understand 2 of those 3 words. Yeah, exactly.
It's like I get, but the rest of them I really no. It's fascinating, and I don't want to go on a tangent on Shawshank because I can talk for hours about Shawshank. But that movie is such an anomaly, and I've analyzed that movie a million times of why it is so why it's so loved and beloved. I always tell people, if you don't like Shawshank, you're dead inside. I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. Something went wrong along the way. You're dead inside. I'm sorry.
But when I give talk from time to time, and when I use Shawshank as an example, I do say, how many of you have seen it? And there's always sometimes there'll be one person if there's a room of like 50 people, and everyone else turns to them, and the main question is not is like, how have you not seen this movie? Like, this is an essential movie. And what's so funny is that the next movie they made, the Green Mile, another 3-hour brutal racist prison drama from Stephen King.
I love it.
But anyways, this is not a tangent, but my theory on Shawshank is that movie is essentially, it's got a fun plot in the sense that it's got
fun.
Intrigue.
Fun. Yeah, fun is not a word I would use.
No. Sorry, no. But what I'm saying is the twist.
Of course.
We won't ruin it for anyone. But the main reason that's a distraction. I don't think that's the reason it's a successful film. I think that's fun, but I think that's what it gives people in the front of their mind to be distracted. The reason it's so successful is for 3 hours it asks one basic question.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Which is, can these two be friends? And they're the most unfriendly people in the world. One is a wrongly convicted, quiet accountant who's in an incredibly brutal place. The other guy is in prison. He's black in a place in a time that's incredibly racist. It's unfair. And throughout the whole movie, you're saying, are they friends? Are they friends? Are they friends? And the final out of focus shot says, yes, they are. And then your heart explodes because you're like, oh my God, they were friends. And that's what that movie does. It asks one question repeatedly for 3 hours and then gives you a satisfying answer.
Now I'm going to give you my theory, because now we're going to do, I'm sorry, audience, this is going to happen. So just settle in for a second, because we're going to do this. I agree with that. I think that is one of the multi-layers of this film. I always found it to be, and I'm sorry, spoiler alert for anyone who's not seen Shawshank Redemption. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ending. So please fast forward. But I always saw it as a allegory of our existence. And I'm going to go deep here. Nice. As our existence as human beings, because I feel that many of us feel like Andy Dufresne, that life has put us in boxes that we do not belong in, that we've been wrongly accused of, whether that be our life circumstances, our family life, our jobs, whatever it is. And then that beating that he gets throughout the movie, and getting the rapings and all the other things that happen to him, is life doing that to us on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, again and again and again. And it is a life sentence, just like him. It's a life sentence. So when he figures out a way to not overpower, but with his mind break free, and that he has to go through 3 football fields worth of crap to get out of that. And when he's so finally exposed, it's almost like he's being birthed again at the end, when he rips off his clothes, and that he's been able to outsmart the thing that put him there. It is the ultimate cathartic feeling for us. Like, oh my God, what if I could do that to my boss? What if I could do that to a family member that's been pounding me all these years, emotionally, verbally, or whatever, or whatever situation in life has been doing that to you. And that is why I feel that it cuts through every genre, age, male, female, it doesn't matter. I remember watching that movie out. It was in 94, it was released. And that year, I'll never forget it. I was fresh out of high school. And my high school, friends at the time, who, we all thought Jean-Claude Van Damme was the greatest actor of all time. We all said, holy cow, was that a great movie? It cut through even maturity level. And only after you get older do you realize a lot of other levels of it. But even at that basic level, it cut through. That's my interpretation.
I love that. That is such a good point. And the interesting thing about Red is that the Morgan Freeman character is that I can understand everybody identifying with Andy Dufresne, but nobody is really identifying with Red. And I read something a while ago that was talking about the TV show Entourage. Yeah. And it said the reason that the Entourage works is not because men have a fantasy about being Vince. It's not that they want to fuck movie stars and they want to be rich. It's that they want to be best friends with Vince, so they get to fuck movie stars and have all this stuff. Like, they don't want the responsibility or the pressure or the expectation of being Vince. They want to be Turtle. They want to be E. And
they want to be drama.
Yeah, exactly. That's what men want. They want that kind of like
Access.
access, but without the responsibility. And so everybody wants to have a friend like Red, but nobody actually wants to be Red. And because here's a guy that can get you everything, but you can still be quiet Andy. You know what? I buy that. I like your theory on that one.
I like your theory as well. I think they're both valid and they both work in the same way. It's just I think that movie has so many layers and levels of things that are going on that it is as perfect of a film as I've ever seen. Honestly,
absolutely.
You know,
and it proves to me that you like. I'm joking about it being a brutal, prison drama, but it is. And what I like about that is that it teaches you that there's no story that can't, that's impossible for it to be something that can connect with people. And if you can have that movie that's that extreme, connecting with so many people in such an extreme way, and anything's possible. It's not that everything is possible, but anything. Yeah.
No, if the story's good, it will cut through all of this. If the story is
exactly
well executed and directed it's just amazing. But back to voiceover. Sorry, guys. Sorry we went on Shawshank.
You can come back now. We finished chatting. So anyway, one of the first theories I had, I really wanted to test when we started on this data was voiceover and is it correlate with bad scripts? And I can tell you now that the answer is it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
If you have a huge amount, then obviously it's a problem. But a huge amount of anything, I can show you that a huge amount of exclamation marks don't help. A huge amount of anything doesn't help. But fundamentally, it doesn't matter. And so I've updated my understanding of this, and I now think that I still believe that there is a loose correlation between voiceover and bad movies, but now I'm putting the blame on editors and producers who are doing hack jobs to quote unquote save a movie or to make it shorter or to whatever, like Blade Runner.
Oh, you remember? I was about to just cough out Blade Runner. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And so that's my theory. Is now is that actually writing voiceover is fine. It's how you use it. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a tool, and you as an artist need to paint with that, and what you paint matters. But it's not a bad thing. It's not something to. One of the things I hope I can do with this project is if you are a writer who is currently being told that to cut voiceover you believe is important, and you're being told because it's a fact that voiceover is bad, I can tell you for a fact it's not. It's what you do with it.
Yeah, I know Robert McKee yells at people for using voiceover, but like everything, it's a tool. It can be used right or not.
Also, he might not be wrong as well that it's correlated with bad movies, but that's different to bad screenplays. Really important that we understand that because movies go through so many processes with so many people between the screenplay and the big screen, and that's why this data stuff is so interesting. We need to chop all of these different stages down and analyze them separately so that we're not confusing one thing and doing something else. We're not just thinking, I saw a bad movie with voiceover, therefore I'll never write it. No, don't do what that movie did that made it bad. It's not. You're focusing on the wrong thing.
Now, I love the next part I want to talk about. And for everyone listening in a car with a child, this is the part where you might want to skip or pause and listen to it privately. We're going to talk about swearing in scripts. And that, you see, I just love that there was somebody who counted how many shits there were in 12,000 scripts. How many fucks there were in 12,000 scripts, in other words. And I just love that you are that person. Stephen, I do.
Well, can I just state for the record, I did not read every script.
Of course not.
Going, there's one.
No, obviously not. You would still be doing it. But that that was one of the data points that we needed to discover. That was it. 80.
I can tell you that I built a machine to a little algorithm to discuss these, which means I'm one of the few people who can say I have built a fuck machine.
No,
I've built a shit machine and I've built a cunt machine.
No, but so the word that's most used is shit. Sort of swear word, and followed quickly by fuck, and then the C word. I never like saying the C word, but the C word drops down to like less than 10% of all scripts had this word because it's a harsh word. It's harsher than shit or fuck, but it's fascinating how and then also in genre, which genre uses the most swear words? Comedy, action, and horror.
And the thing is, I think they're all doing different things in the sense that action, it's about exclamations of like surprise. I think horror, it's about pain and frustration. Whereas comedy, it's they're using it in a different way. And in another part of the report, we found that there's a strong correlation between sexual words to do with sex that are in comedy. So if you look at most words to do with whether it's genitalia or different sex or whatever, sexual acts, they're much more likely to be found in comedies. So people, because thrillers don't tend to be fundamentally about sex, whereas comedies can be or are more likely to be. So it's interesting. They've all got different reasons for being, on that top part of the script, top part of the chart.
But I'm looking at the report right now, Stephen, and I'm giggling because there's a graph and a graphic with fuck 63.3%, fuck cunt 9%, and it's throwing, and I'm like, oh my god, this is brilliant.
Do you know what? That is a Venn diagram with 3 circles showing the overlap of people who use
there's overlapping and stuff. Yes.
But the graph caused me the biggest problem of all of the report. And as we said before, it's a lot of, and this one was a problem because every time I sent notes to my graphic designer, it went to his spam folder, because at one point, over half of all the words in the email were the 3 worst words in the English language. Well,
sure.
And so this was a problem for moderation more than anything else. And I was trying to, point out that this is academic. It's not like we're children, But what was interesting is that there is a correlation. Earlier in the report, we looked at the correlation between the amount of swearing and the scores it got. And we found that actually across all the films, as they got swearier, they got higher and higher scores, not insignificantly, apart from the most. The top 20% in the 20% who got the most sweariness in it, they're the ones, they didn't perform that well. But the ones that had some swearing, or what we call as a lot of swearing, so this is the sort of third and fourth, fifth of all the scripts, they actually scored the highest. And when we try to look into why this was, obviously or family, but across all the scripts it was like this. And when we sort of drill down to try and work out why, we discovered a pattern where the swearier the script was, the higher the score was for voice, which is one of the things that we can measure, like we were talking about before with catharsis and things like that. So what's happening is that a lot of times script readers are correlating the use of swearing with how good the writer's voice is, or good writers swear a lot. We don't know the difference between the two. They would both show up the same. But this is a really good example of this is true and this is very useful. But at the same time, just putting more swear words in there is misreading the results. It just says the kinds of people who have the strongest writing voice are more likely to swear than the ones that don't.
Well, I mean,
fascinating.
It is actually quite fascinating. But again, given Tarantino or Shane Black the power of cursing, they use it as an art form. It's a paintbrush for them.
Yeah.
They don't lean on it as a crutch, where a lot of screenwriters I find in scripts that I've read lean on it as a crutch, as I have nothing cool to say here, so I'm just going to say the F word, as opposed to something that really makes sense. It's an art, like when Tarantino curses, it's an art form.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you'd say that his writing voice is coming out of that. You're absolutely right. So yeah, kind of interesting. I'm not sure. There's a few things in here where I don't really want people to take this as literal advice to do tomorrow. It's more as a route to understand how things work. But yeah, if suddenly the spec script world becomes a lot swearier, then it's your fault.
It's your fault, sir. Yeah. It's your fault. And then age of characters, I found not surprising but interesting, where basically 30s is the sweet spot. That's the
it's not so much you're right, that's the most common, and so we don't have individual data on the actual screenwriters, so I can't tell you whether people who are over 60 write characters that are over 60. I'd love to, but I think that's a bit people have to choose to give us that data, and it's just a bit too much private data. But what we do know is across all our writers, the average age is about 31, 32. And so unsurprisingly, the most common age for characters is in their 30s. But what you find is if you look at the age of the characters and then you look at how often they speak, you find that as characters get older, they speak less, which is just typical of someone in their early 30s or late 20s thinking, the older they get, the less relevant they are, the less, they drive the story, which I thought was kind of fun. And also the idea that, there are things in here that I think one of the things a good writer will always be thinking about is how will this show on screen? How will people see this? So, for example, the most common final digit in an age was characters was 0. So the characters were 20, 30, 40, 50. That makes sense, right? But then the next most common was 5, 25, 35, 45. But after that, it was 8. So 28, 38, 48. And I think that's because the writers think that when you write somebody's 28, you're saying something about their character. They are older, but maybe they've got regrets. They've got time to try and achieve things. People, midlife crisis, maybe hits people around 38 or whatever. And so there's information that the writers are trying to convey that is probably never going to be shown on screen. If the characters are having a midlife crisis, then you have to show them saying it, living it, driving a new car, whatever it is. But just saying their age won't do it. So it's kind of interesting about that one of those things as a writer is, are you conveying that information in a way that will make it through to the big screen and into the minds of your audience?
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about this report, and believe it or not, everyone, there is a lot more information in this report than what we've discussed. We haven't given away all the goodies. And are you giving this away? Are you doing it a pay as you can? What is going on with this?
No, we're giving it away, actually. And the last report I did, a horror report, I did it as a pay what you want because it took a lot of time to put together the horror report. And I thought if I can make a sustaining business out of people paying for these reports that I can then put the money into the next report, that would be great. And so it was a minimum of $1 and anything else more you wanted. This time around, we're doing it entirely for free because we figured that what we really want to do here, Screencraft and I got together to help screenwriters.
Mm-hmm.
They've given up loads of their time. They've given me access in various ways to their data. But it's fundamentally something that we really are doing, not as a commercial thing. And they're not paying me. And, what it is, it's just to help people. And it might make it a little harder for the people who really could get some. So it's going to be a free download. By the time you listen, already free. If you go to stephenfollows.com, that's STEPHENFOLLOWS, you'll be able to find it and download the whole thing as a PDF for free. And I do want to say a big thank you to the people who bought the horror report in the past, whether you paid $1, whether you paid $20, whether you paid $50. Thank you, because some of the things we had to do for this report, we had to pay for services or like the graphic designer or little costs, but they're costs. And the money that people paid and donated for the horror report went into this one. So the fact this is free is thanks to the people who chose to give anything last time, but also especially the people who chose to give more than the minimum. Loved that. The community can give what they can. Everyone gives what they want to give and what they think it will help them. And yet together we can all move ourselves forward. Then that's a happy outcome.
And we are going to put links to the report and to all of Stephen's insane work in the show notes as well. And then we're also going to talk, I might have you back for the horror report, honestly.
Yeah, let's do it.
I might have you back for the horror report because the horror report, let's just try to tease everybody listening. It went through how many films?
All of them.
So basically every horror film ever created, you actually...
I think it was ever released in US cinemas ever. So I think it's about 10,000 films. So it's not like if you made a feature with your mates and no one saw it. It's ones that made it to some form of distribution at some point throughout the last 100 years. I spent a year and a half looking at them in every possible way. And it was really enjoyable. Funny enough, I'm not actually much of a horror fan, and I don't really watch horror films. It's not what I want as a fan. But as someone who wants to understand the industry, it was really exciting because as I said, there's the lowest correlation between the quality of the film and the success, which immediately suggests the question, well, what does matter? And also because it's the most accessible genre for low-budget filmmakers. And it can, in theory, you could be the next Paranormal Activity or next Blair Witch, whereas you're not going to be the next Jurassic Park. So it's an accessible genre that's fun to make, that actually you can affect it more than just get good. And so for me, that was like, okay, I can do something here. I can help people who want to make horror films by helping them show what kind of things. But you're right. It's like 200 pages. It took a year and a half. It's a whole new podcast, I think.
I'm going to have you back, Stephen. We're going to talk about the horror report because I think that's going to be extremely beneficial to the tribe. And I just want to read it too, because it sounds fascinating, So Stephen, I want to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give a screenwriter wanting to break into the business today, or a filmmaker?
I'd say it's there's two things which sound like they're the opposite, but they're not. One is about you, which is, just get good, and they get good really, really slowly, and it's really, really hard. You just keep working at it, and you keep writing and writing, and everyone says, right, and actually that is the right thing to do. You just keep producing the work, and so that's a sort of inward note. But then the second thing is you got to get out there, and you got to meet people, not because you're going to meet the next Harvey Weinstein or studio boss in a lift. God, that has a completely different meaning nowadays.
It does. Oh, yeah, scratch that. Yes.
Scratch that. Not because you're going to meet the next studio boss in a lift, pitch them, and then she's going to hire you. That might happen, but that's not the reason you go out and meet people. It's because you meet people who are in the same position as you, and they're in the same part of the journey. And everyone says networking. Networking is, I tell you what, it's people standing in the corner of an industry event, clinging onto their drink, hating it, standing next to somebody else.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Hey, I'm Steven. I hate this. And someone else going, hey, I'm Alex. I hate this too. Oh, cool. And then talking. That's what networking is. And the more you can do that, the more you'll meet people who are in the same position as you, but they're a producer, they're a director or a writer, whatever you need. Someone who's been there before who can help you, or there's someone who can work for you or you can bring them on your team. And you keep at it, you keep turning up. And you look at the people who are successful, they are very talented, but they've also turned up a huge amount. And the most of the people that come in at the same time as you, the first year you're in film, loads of people coming in the same year. Most of those people are lazy. Mm-hmm. Most of them are flaky. Most of them have got other things to do, and that's great. Like, good luck to them. It's great that they're leaving the industry to do other things that make them happy. And if they haven't got the stamina for it, it's better they find out now. But the more years you keep turning up, keep producing work, keep showing it to people, keep talking to people, you just get good by turning up, because people see you, they give you advice, you see patterns, and then very quickly you realize that the person that you met at that party 5 years ago, they're now actually got a film that did well, and they're looking for another script, and they know you. And suddenly it seems a bit easier. So after like 5, 6, 7 years, maybe 10 years, depending on where you are and what you're doing, suddenly things almost become easier out of nowhere. But what's really happened is it took you 10 years without any feedback of success to build those roots. And the last thing I'd say is that when I was a kid, I'm British, and I grew up in Britain. And when I'm watching all of these comedies in the 90s, everybody seemed to be on these comedy TV shows. Everybody seemed to be in each other's shows. And I always used to think, how do I break into that circle? How do I break into the circle? And now, as an adult and as someone who understands the industry, I realize you don't break into their circle. You make your own circle.
Yes.
And do it when nobody else is anybody else. And everybody else is unemployed, has never done anything, isn't good yet. And you connect, you work together, and then suddenly one day you wake up and you realize you're in a circle and you're in your own club. And no one can break in, really. Like, it's not that you're pushing them away. It's just that given the first choice, why would you not work with these people that you've worked with for 10 years who also were there for you when there was no money and no fame, and they still showed up? Of course you're going to hire them first, which means there's no space for anyone to break in. But they should be people making their own circle in another room somewhere. And in the future, they'll be the people that will be in the same position you are now. And I think that's really important to realize, is that all of the work is done before the light gets shone on you, and you have to work hard when no one's watching, because eventually that does pay off. It just isn't sexy, it isn't fun, it isn't easy, it doesn't pay, and it's not the sexy kind of montage you see in a movie of people just writing and then being angry and then suddenly being happy and then they've got it and then it's the next morning. It's far less sexy than that.
That's some great advice, and I've asked that question hundreds of times on this show. That's the first time that's ever been answered that way. So it's a really great piece of advice.
Cool. Thank you.
Now, can you tell me what book had the biggest impact on your life or career?
Interesting. I read a lot, and I read a lot of nonfiction to try and understand different people's worlds. And I'd say, it's hard to say the one, but I'd say one that is incredibly powerful, that really ticked a lot of boxes, was Creativity, Inc.
Oh, what a great book. Oh,
such a great book. And it's so nice to have an entertaining story with a person's life story, but also it's a business book, and it's a book about how to be a creative person.
Yes.
But the other thing, I'm going to cheat and give you a second book, because It's entirely different. There's a book called The Golden Theme. And it's a short book, and it's by a story theorist called Brian McDonald. And he also wrote Invisible, Ink and a few others. He is a genius and is totally, I wouldn't say underappreciated, because lots of people know how good he is. But I don't understand why he's not, Bigger Than McKee, or Talking More, and so his stuff is amazing. And The Golden Theme is a fairly short little book. It's not a whole book. Like Invisible Ink is a whole book about screenwriting. The Golden Theme is about one idea that he's seen throughout many different the history of stories and art and things like that. That there is one theme that seems to come up a lot in the work that's really successful, and it's this idea that we're all the same. And he talks about it, and he doesn't even make it a long book. He doesn't need to. He makes it gives some examples, talks about it, and says that when that comes up, it tends to be really powerful. And as soon as you read this, you're like, yeah, I can see it. And you walk around the world going, oh my God, it's there. Oh my God, it's there. And then you realize you can put it into your work. And so, anything written by Brian McDonald, but particularly Golden Theme. It was out of print for a while, but I think it's come back into print. And if it's brilliant, well then get it, read it. It'll take you an hour to read it, and it will transform your writing, I think.
Yeah, it's actually I'm on Amazon right now as we speak, so it's being put in it's being put in my cart, sir. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Well, obviously, the only honest answer is I don't know yet, but I won't give you that one. I think. I tell you, okay, so I wouldn't say it took me a long time to get to the same answer everyone always told me. So I used to read lots of books about internet startups and things like that because I've always thought there's a strong correlation between running a production company or being an independent producer or director and having a startup. It's a very similar model. It's just that you don't have the bit where you turn it into a multi-trillion pound enterprise and you get to be floating on the stock market. But the first few bits are very similar. And they all say things like, you talk to serial investors in Silicon Valley, and they always say, we're investing in the people, not the product. And when there's one investor, when one creator, we're less keen to invest. But when there's a team of 2 or 3 people, then it really matters. That's a team of 2 or 3 great people who work together. That's the most investable combination. And so you hear that, but you think, well, yeah, but how can I find my kind of partnerships or whatever? And so you kind of forget it. But then when I look back on the things that have really mattered, it is partnerships. And I've ended up working with lots of different people. And some people I've worked with once, and that's been fine. Other times I've wanted to work with people again and again. And as a small number of people who I have ongoing work with, whether it's a limited company like an actual commercial business, or whether it's someone I just have got a shared lexicon with. And looking at the people that really I work with and have ongoing relationships with, I can see how they bring the best out in me. I bring the best out in them. They catch the worst of me and I catch the worst of them. And as Alex and I were talking about beforehand, it's about sometimes there are things that I hate that I think it's just the worst thing in the world. And for someone else, it's the best thing they could possibly do. And you and I talking about you loving promotion and marketing, and me, I can't stand it, can't do it. And yet with the film data stuff, this stuff is not a sweat for me. It's hard work, but it's not impossible. Whereas for other people, it could be hard to imagine what it is. And if you find someone who you truly understand, you share a worldview, you share a view of how the world should be, but your interests and desires are fundamentally opposed, that's a really good model. So I'd say, don't try and find people who want to do what you're doing. Find people who believe what you believe, and then do a little project with them. And if that works, do another one. And you don't have to, meet somebody and propose to them. You can just keep working with them, and then you'll find the people who keep showing up. And that is the most wonderful, supportive thing, where you have someone who gets you, who will work with you, catch the worst of you, unclip you so you can run to the best of you. And it's just immense fun. So yeah, be open to that and try and find those people, as hard as that might sound.
And what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Oh, Jesus. I think Shawshank Redemption, we talked about that.
Obviously.
I wish I had the balls to say, Jurassic Park, the Fallen Kingdom and the Fallen Kingdom 2, whatever it's called. I don't. I think Inside Out is an amazing movie about just what it is to be human. And I've watched that movie so many times. I still don't know how they did it, and I just in a story basis I just don't understand what that is. And I also think I think what was that movie called? I can't even remember the name now. I think it won the Oscar, and it's about God, I got a complete mind blank. It's an Austrian film about the secret police in the 80s. And hold on, my wife's in the room. What's it called? Lives of Others. That's why I got married. See, my wife catches.
Same here, sir. Same here.
Remember what I said about find a partner who understands, shares your worldview, but has different skills.
Yes.
She can remember names and stuff. The Lives of Others, and again another movie where you watch it and you're just like, how? What? That's amazing. How did you do that? And yet it's so clear. It's just great work on every level. They're the movies that seem to really move me.
And where can people find you and your amazing work, sir?
So all my work's at stephenfollows.com. Occasionally I don't tend to do work published in other places, just time more than anything else. But some of the work I've done with Bruce Nash, who runs the numbers, is on the AFM website. I think there's copies of it on my site as well. And I'm going to use this opportunity. If you've spent the last hour and a half, maybe 10 minutes if Alex has been editing it judiciously, listening to me and to Alex, and you're already listening to his podcast, I know you've got one or two amazing questions for me to research. I know that there's some stuff that you're like, is that always the case? When does that work? What's this? I don't care how stupid it sounds, how everyone tells you, no one knows. Maybe it is a stupid question. Maybe no one can know. But I would love to have any question you can send me to research, because the best stuff I've ever looked at is when people have said, you know what, you're probably not meant to do this, or everyone always says this, and it suggests something I never thought of. I go away and look at it and come back, and it's really pleasing because I can actually help. And this is me. I'm not gonna reply with one idiot question, go away. Even the questions which sound the most kind of strange or straightforward are speaking to a wider truth. So go to my site, go on the contact page, so stephenfollows.com, go to the contact page, send me, fill in the form, it comes straight to me, it goes to my inbox. I will happily respond to everything, as in if I have the answer, I'll send it to you, the link. If I think it's impossible, I'll say so, but probably I'll say that's a great question, I'll put it on my list, and then one day when I have the data or the time, I'll look at it and it'll become an article. Not only will you get closure, but also so many other people have shared, I guarantee you, share your question, and it would be really nice to be able to help. So if you guys can help me, go on my site, send me questions, ideas, things I should research in the film industry, and I'd really appreciate that.
Oh, well, beware what you wish for, sir. That's all I'm going to say for that right now. Be careful what you wish for. You might get.
Tell you what, put a message out there that said Alex sent me.
Oh, jeez.
I'm part of the tribe.
I'm part of IFH tribe. Yeah, put that. I've done this before, and I've warned people not to do stuff like this because they get inundated with emails and conference. So I'm curious to see what will happen. But of course, thank you so much for being so generous, not only with your time today, but your constant work in helping filmmakers and screenwriters and people in the business try to succeed. So I truly, from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate all the hard work you do, and you do an immense amount of hard work, almost selfless in many ways to help the industry. So thank you again for that and for being on the show, sir.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for the time. And I'm too British to start talking about all the great work you do, but likewise to you. But also thanks for having the time to chat about these things. This is how we get the word out there. This is how we realize we are all the same and we all have the same challenges. So if I can be part of this, I feel honored. So thanks again.
I want to thank Stephen for coming on the show and really dropping some major knowledge bombs on the tribe today. Thank you so much, Stephen. If you want to get links to this insane report, please head over to the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/BPS047. And you'll get links to anything else we discussed in this episode, also including his new course on crowdfunding for filmmakers. If you have a project and you need some advice on how to crowdfund properly, his course is pretty insane as well. So definitely check that out. And if you have not already, please head over to screenwritingpodcast.com and leave a good review for the show. It truly, truly helps us out a lot. And we want to get ranked as high as we can on iTunes. So it really, really does help. Thank you so much, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this crossover episode. As always, keep on writing, no matter what. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.